we've just been talking about the situation. The absolute shambles. It was like some kind of clown school yesterday in Westminster. And quite frankly, I think all of you, actually, if any of you is watching, I think you should all be ashamed. We talk about why people are disconnected with politics. Well, look in the mirror. Last night showed why. That's what I've got to say. Anyway, look, one of the key core aspects to this, though, is whether or not we have a situation now where basically extremist mobs are running around basically dictating British democracy. Nigel Farage, for example, he's come out and said religious sectarianism is a threat, and that actually many people are basically turning a blind eye. Let's explore this. Richard, do you agree with that?
I do entirely, and I've seen it already. We saw it last night with the demonstrations outside the House of Commons. They were sort of portraying images and words onto Big Ben. That is a criminal offence.
Well, look, let's be blunt, and I'm sorry to offend anyone, but what you're referring to was the fact that some fella with a projector was projecting from the river to the sea on Big Ben.
He was breaking the law, and the police were standing there watching it, and the reason they didn't arrest him is that they're afraid. They're afraid of these people. They've been told to dumb it down and not to arrest them, even though they know they're breaking the law. And that's because of the fear that is now pervading through these demonstrations because of a lack of leadership. And you're seeing it in elections going on at the moment, where it's not about a local town, it's about Gaza. And you're thinking, what on earth is going on here? And we're going to have independent Islamist candidates standing in this general election this year who are probably going to beat Labour candidates, and that is happening as we speak. And we could well end up in a situation by December this year, we've got 10 to 20 such candidates on the Green benches as MPs. And I think that was a big shock.
Aaron?
Well, people can stand for Parliament regardless of their beliefs. I mean, I think that's reasonable in a democratic free society. And obviously people have the right to protest if they break the law. That's for the police to determine and to deal with. What I would say as well, though, is that I think Mr Farage's comments understate actually the history of British politics. If you go back a century, you had the suffragettes, 1913, they blew up the country home in Surrey of David Lloyd George. You had, of course, Irish republicanism. You had a war on the island next door to this one. You had a labour movement, very militant in the 1910s. So this idea, I'm not suggesting that's good or bad or anything, I'm simply providing context. The idea that British democracy hasn't had to deal with crises of various kinds over the decades, from World War to the IRA, to things I just listed.
Whether or not it's a new phenomenon,
it's certainly not new.
All right, so many people would agree with that. It's not new, but that doesn't change things in the here and now. So in the here and now, what do you say to this whole notion that actually there is this group of, let's be honest about what it is, because it's not extreme Buddhists, is it? It's extreme Islamist people that have an extreme ideology about how they want this country to look, operate and run, and what belief system they want people to adhere to. And that is being having a blind eye turned against
Is that what they're protesting over, though?
Well, and this is where it becomes interesting.
This is where it's heading, and I actually think we need a law that explicitly says that no one can conduct, in any walk of life in the United Kingdom, Sharia law, because that is where this is heading, and it's really bad news. And frankly, we want to keep religion out of politics, because otherwise you see the sectarianism. You're right about the context, but when that happens, generally it ends in extreme tension, extreme divisions, violence and death, and we should keep it out of our politics, out of our democracy.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, I certainly don't think... I think extreme political positions, generally, they need to be mediated through the democratic process. If they're not, it tends to be very bad news. I think, by the way, that's an argument for proportional representation. And what I'd say to Richard is maybe we disagree. Maybe it's not so bad if you have, quote-unquote, an Islamist MP, because the reality is those ideas, those individuals are then tested by the democratic system. If they fail, they get the boot. This is why when, for instance, the BNP won 2 members of the European Parliament in 2009, I don't think that's a bad thing, because if they don't perform, their ideas are revealed as not particularly effective. I think with the two-party system as we have it, it's prone to whinging by people like me, people like Richard, because it's very hard to break through that. And I think some of the people whinging, if they were tested, some would succeed, some would make their country better, and some wouldn't, and they'd be found out. So that might sound like a strange counterintuitive response. I would say that's why we need PR.
See, I wonder, because there might be some Muslim viewers watching. I mean, my best friend, she actually converted, she will say reverted to Islam, and she is just a normal, decent, she kind of gets on with her life and there's no problems. And so I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there's a problem with all Muslims in the land. Of course, absolutely not. But it's absolutely undeniable that there is a fragment of these people that want to cause harm to the Western civilization in the way that we know it. I think that it's interesting that you regard, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you regard that as almost like a genocidal chant.
Oh, without question.
Do you share that sentiment? No. You see, so let's just thrash this out.
But Netanyahu says the same thing. He can say it. I don't, it's just words. It's just words. I believe in free speech. Unless it's incitement, I believe in free speech.
Well, let me tell you, I've been on a couple of these marches and gone in and asked the people on them as to whether or not they condemn Hamas, whether they condemn October the 7th, and whether they want to free the hostages. And I get shouted at, I get abused, I get hollering, banging the drums, the big megaphone. They'll never engage in the debate and they won't agree with that. And that shows they are deep. This is all about supporting Hamas and being deeply, deeply anti-Semitic. And we've allowed that to happen through weak leadership by our police, and it's awful.
But there will be some people there, though, on those protests who are just normal, average Joes who are heartbroken at the concept of innocent children getting orphaned, getting maimed, and all the rest of it.
Michelle, I'm sorry. I was there on October the 9th, before Israel had responded at all. Outside the Israeli embassy, I was abused, I was ranted at. They had their banners out, ceasefire now, free Palestine. I mean, this is all about anti-Semitism and their hatred of Israel. That's what it's about. I accept there are plenty of peaceful people on those marches, but there is a significant number who are not.
You've been on those marches.
I haven't, Sally, because I've got a small child. I've got a 14-week-old baby, so it's almost perfectly lined up.
But you would have done if he was available?
Of course I would have, yeah.
And so what do you think about what Richard's saying, this characterisation then, that they're all like people that are quite extremist and all the rest of it?
No, I think overwhelmingly the people on these protests and demonstrations are decent, upstanding, law-abiding, good, honourable, honest people, Muslim, Jew or Christian. You will have people, obviously, who are deplorable or dislikable or disreputable, and unfortunately, whatever the cause, by the way, we saw this with Brexit and Leave, people will say, well, this characterises everybody. All the Leave voters are fascists. Ridiculous.
But it is undeniable that a lot of Jewish people say that they feel really intimidated and actually they wouldn't go into central London on a weekend when that protest is occurring.
Two things. First, that's hugely important, and I'm not dismissing that in the slightest, but what I would say is that doesn't mean the majority of people protesting are those things that have been described. You can be worried about something if it's just a very small minority. That's justifiable. Secondly, there are Jewish people on these protests. And again, you can say that's a minority of the Jewish community, which is true. But there are Jewish people on these protests, and I wouldn't want to mischaracterise that.
I want to play you a clip, actually, of Sir Lindsay Hoyle, because it actually really chilled me. I alluded to it in the earlier part of this programme, but just listen to what he had to say on some of these issues. Listen.
I will defend every member in this House. Every member matters to me in this House. And it has been said, both sides, I never, ever want to go through a situation where I pick up a phone to find a friend of whatever side has been murdered by terrorists.
You see, obviously, I mean, I do want to just, because sometimes I do feel like you've got to state the obvious, but obviously nobody wants anyone to be murdered by any terrorist. I just want to put that out there. But there is something quite concerning about the people that are leading our democracy, that when you give the impression that actually, if you want to change laws or influence democracy in this country, all you've got to do is stand outside of the House of Commons, and you've got to say that you just got to ring up someone and say, you know what, I'm gonna bomb your friend, or I'm going to attack such and such an MP, and that is a route to changing democracy.
It's appalling. And look, Aaron's right. It is the extreme elements, and you're quite right. The vast, vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving people who want to get on with their lives and contribute to their work and their communities, which is fantastic. It is the extreme elements, but it's the extreme elements who are out there doing this stuff, and they're the extreme people who are terrifying MPs, whether it's Tobias Ellwood with his home, whether it's other Labour MPs dotted around the country. And that's what happens when the police don't step in urgently, rapidly, robustly, and say, no, this is not where it goes. Last night, there were people, in defiance of the new law about wearing masks on these marches, just being waved on by the police. just doing the square root of zip.
Well, actually, I don't know if you saw I don't know why I'm laughing because it's not funny, but I don't know if you saw GBNews last night. Martin Dewberry, he actually had an egg for an. I mean, I don't know who goes to a protest carrying a 6-pack of eggs. I mean, it baffles me.
Got one here.
Have you? Oh, well, yeah, I won't tempt anyone. But what do you think to that? Not Martin Dewberry being egged.
I don't want Martin being egged, but it was ironic. Somebody showed a tweet of his taking the mick out of Jeremy Corbyn when he was egged, and I thought, there but for the grace of God go
there you
I.
go, like I'm putting it on the screen.
But, I think that doesn't mean Martin
But
should
look,
be egged.
by the way, if you're listening, not watching, let me just tell you, sorry to interrupt.
Please go.
So you've seen this girl, she's wandered up to Martin, she's launched this egg at him. This copper is about, I don't know, maybe like 30 centimetres or whatever behind her. I mean, that could have been anything she was throwing at him. The kind of copper just doesn't really do anything. Like, nothing really happens. He just kind of stands there.
Yeah,
look.
well, what I would say is that with the police, one of their jobs is to maintain public order, and they have to make a calculation in the moment, which is if I prosecute a certain course of action, will that create a public order situation? You can agree or disagree, but that will be their rationale.
Right, let me tell you this.
But that's the fair point. That absolutely proves the point. It's about fear. Who is threatening the most? And the police are afraid of that mob. And it's appalling. And the Met Police leadership should hang their heads in shame for allowing... They've literally left their own frontline officers unprotected, defenceless, without the right kit. They should have had the TSG there with serious kit, no nonsense, and actually respect the law, or you're going to be arrested.
Should they?
Well, I'd scrap the TSG. That's a separate debate. I think the amount of compensation claims people get out of them is costing the taxpayer an arm and a leg. But what I would say is, on this, Margaret Thatcher went through, and it's very important to not dismiss what Lindsay Hoyle's saying there, hugely important. Margaret Thatcher, the IRA tried to blow her up a couple of times.
Indeed,
and
right.
Look, I'm on the left. I don't like Margaret Thatcher, but fair play to the woman. She carried on with her political agenda and it didn't put her off. And I do wonder and worry about a political class which won't want to be critiqued, won't want to be held accountable, and they'll use the language of safe space, offence, hashtag be kind. And I'm not suggesting serious things have happened, Mike Freer, Joe Cox, etc., but I'm worried you can overcompensate.
I remember David Amos, and I remember David Amos, of course, you'll be familiar. He was murdered by an Islamist fanatic, and I remember the conversation in the House of Commons was not about how on earth do we clamp down on Islamist extremism. It was all about hashtag be kind. Can we all start talking to each other nicely and tweeting nice things to each other? It's an absolute shambles, and this, I'm telling you, is going to get absolutely worse. And I'll just say this, that woman that chucked that egg at Martin Dewberry, can you imagine for a split second if that was someone like a Tommy Robinson, one of his supporters, someone on the opposite side of that fence? If they wouldn't even have got the hand in the pocket to pick anything out. They'd have been pepper sprayed in their eyes, pushed down to that floor. It is complete and utter double standards in the policing. What are we going to do about it all?